Welcome back to the Daily Drum on WHUR and Sirius XM Channel 141. This is the Insight segment. I'm Harold Fisher. Tonight, we are turning our focus toward Minneapolis, where federal immigration enforcement has transformed daily life. After weeks of Operation Metro Surge, hundreds of federal agents were pulled back last week, though some 2,000 remain, even as local leaders say their presence is still causing more harm than good. At the same time, journalists across the country are losing their jobs, raising tough questions about whether there are enough boots on the ground to tell these real stories, not just in Minneapolis, but nationwide. We're going to hear from the NAACP in Minneapolis and a reporter who has been in the Twin Cities on what life looks like right now. My guests are Cynthia Wilson, president of the Minneapolis chapter of the NAACP, and Keith Alexander, editor-at-large for Bloomberg Law News. Thank you both for joining the conversation. I appreciate you coming in and talking to us. I want to start, first of all, President Wilson, with just kind of where things are now. We were reporting that Tom Homan, with the Trump administration, the border czar, as it were, had said that 700 federal immigration officers were leaving. There were about 3,000 there. Do you believe that that has actually reduced tension, or has it simply changed what enforcement looks like?
And let me just follow up real quick. Hasn't actually happened yet.
It hasn't.
That was going to be my next point.
Okay.
Okay. Right. Well, thank you.
Because we heard that, but we don't. Nothing has been confirmed. We don't. How would I know?
Mm-hmm.
It appears as though there's been some. I guess some tension has been released. They're still out there. ICE is still out there, obviously, and they're still doing what they do. I think right now there's a feeling of, because I have to say this, I'm actually very surprised of the response from our community. I got to be honest.
What do you mean by that?
We're known to be Minnesota nice, but there's a lot of racism and discrimination that's very prevalent. So, they smile and say, "Hey, how are you?" while they're not giving you jobs or they're not giving you housing, So there's an appearance of inclusion, but not. So that's why I'm kind of surprised. But to see that instead of taking to the streets and burning things and causing a lot of the unrest and uprising, I'm grateful that people decided to, work as, loving their neighbors, looking after their neighbors, taking food to families who couldn't get out, taking children to school for the parents who couldn't drop their kids off, staying at the bus stop, picking up the kids, and really seeing the communities and the city band together and protest without very peacefully, without any agitation. Now, don't get me wrong, there are some folks who actually come here to agitate, to get things started. I believe that they could have been paid by the administration, or they heard and was perhaps given instructions to come and agitate. Those are the folks who are throwing ice, letting off firecrackers, and a whole bunch of other things that people have done. But for the most part, there hasn't been anything that has led to any form of uprising. And the protests have been peaceful, and people are out here really supporting the community and their neighbors. So I was glad for that, because it takes some work off of our plate, and it allows for us to help other, organizations who are about the protesting, because we protest. I mean, we have folks within our organization that actually like to be on the front line and do that. But then we have some other folks who are not interested in the protest. They're behind the scenes. They may be making the food baskets to drop off to families. They may be providing hot chocolate to the people who are out there. So wherever you fit in, you get in.
Keith, you have been in and out of Minneapolis for the past 2.5 weeks. And first of all, let me say, as my, colleague and friend, I'm glad that you are safe. But
Thank you.
You did not. You were there for many days. You weren't just there for a day or two. I mean, you were there for quite some time, and so you have a rather unique perspective on what you observed in your reporting.
Right.
What's the thing that struck you?
Several things struck me, and President Wilson touched on several of those things that struck me. One of the things that really jumped out at me, obviously it was cold. It was sub-zero, minus 15, minus 10, minus 15 degree weather every day. And that's a cold that those of us who aren't from there may not be used to. What struck me though, despite those temperatures, seeing people out there casually walking in protest, walking to the memorials to lay down flowers, walking in groups to protest, as if it were 70 degrees outside. They were out there. And that really jumped out at me. Also, what struck me, and I've been to Minneapolis, St. Paul, the Twin Cities numerous times, was hearing the sirens over and over again. It reminded me of DC in the 80s. Just hearing sirens over and over and over again, which was very unusual to hear. And President Wilson, I don't know if you agree with that, but I just was blown away by just keep hearing the sound of police and fire and ambulances over literally every half hour, 45 minutes. I'm talking to my editor on the phone, or a half hour, 15-minute conversation, and during that 15 minutes, even my editor was like, "More sirens? What's going on there?" That's really just jumped out at me. And also, it was interesting. I kept hearing while I was out there that Prince talked about, that Minnesota was going to be the center of the revolution, which is why he named his band group Revolution. Yeah. And people kept bringing that up, that Minnesotans are surprised that this state is now the face of a revolution for this country, because Prince has said that years ago, that that's who Minnesotans are. And I kept hearing that over and over again. And so those are the things that jumped out at me. And also, what really also jumped out at me, and I had a meeting, interview with Keith Ellison, the Attorney General for Minnesota. And I asked him the similarities between George Floyd case and these two fatal shootings that occurred in January, because it was Keith Ellison who pushed for the prosecution of the officer involved in George Floyd's death. And one of the things that he said, obviously, was the fact that all three cases involved trained officers who were trained to provide peace for the community, but instead they end up taking lives. But he also said the fact that the people were out there on the streets recording, and the fact that they had video recordings of George Floyd's death, the fact that in Good and Peretti's death, you have people actually who recorded that. Ellison said that he's got more recordings of these two deaths that occurred in January than he did in the George Floyd case. Yeah. From different angles, from different vantage points, which will be used as evidence should these cases go to trial. And I thought that was really interesting, that the people from Minnesota realize that if they're out there, they can help secure evidence and provide evidence should these cases go to trial. And that's what they're out there doing. They may not be out there protesting, but they're out there with their cameras, making sure the interaction between an agent and a resident is being documented.
President Wilson, I was going to ask you this later, but since you brought it up in the first question that I asked you, and this is the context where we're talking about protests, and historically that is what Black people have been doing whether it was for jobs or for the vote or, or economics or what have you. But what we have seen leading up to the killing of Renee Good and Alex Preddy, and this is just what I've seen on television. I've not been there. You don't see a lot of Black people out there protesting, and I guess I'm wondering from your perspective, is there a sense that Black people have been sitting back on this issue as opposed to where they have done historically?
Yes, and I think a couple of things. One, I think the George Floyd incident gave us time to mature and understand what we've dealt with and what we were dealing with. And so when this happened, unfortunately, it was some white folk. I mean, a life is a life, don't get me wrong, but it was almost like that sigh that, so now the world will see what we've been talking about for decades, about how we've been pulled out of cars, how we've been shot just for asking a question, for getting the license that you asked me to get. I reach for the license and I get killed. So there was a sense of relief, I got to be honest. And then there was also this idea that, okay, it's not us this time. So let's sit back and see how the response is when it's somebody other than Black folks. Mm-hmm. And what we saw is that the white folks got out there and they started protesting. And there, we were in there sprinkled a little bit here and there, but we weren't like we were when it was George Floyd. Absolutely not. And so I think we were giving ourselves some space and some time to just kind of see what the outcome was going to be.
Let me just ask a quick question if I can, Harold.
Sure.
One of the things when I talked to Ellison, the Attorney General, he said that a lot of people are serving as drivers for immigrants. They're driving them back and forth to work. They're driving their kids back and forth to school. As opposed to taking to the streets, they're doing that. They're shuttling people back and forth. Could that also be where a lot of people of color are doing?
Absolutely. So that's what I was going to get to. So the second point was that, so although we're not protesting in great numbers, we are the drivers, the people that's taking groceries, the people who are even babysitting so that these parents can go get some other resources that they need to bring their loved ones back who've been shipped away. We're providing gift cards. We're doing the stuff that you might not see on the front lines, which is kind of what I was alluding to earlier. There are people who actually like to be out there, and they're sprinkled here and there. But for the most part, I think most of the organizations are drivers, people supporting through delivering groceries, through babysitting, whatever the need is for these families. And so I think that's the main way that folks of color are participating.
And also, sorry.
Go ahead, Keith.
Also, you asked me a question. What also surprised me, I didn't even think about this. There are a lot of businesses that are going under, that relied on these workers. And because these workers are afraid to go to work, these businesses are now shutting down, which I was very surprised and saddened to see.
Yeah, they said something in the high millions. I don't know the number. I can't remember the number, but business have lost that like millions of dollars. Some are closing down. Some are, seeking assistance through the state. And a lot of these are a majority of small businesses, right? Mm-hmm. So they banked on these employees doing the work and keeping those doors open, and now that's not happening.
Yeah. Hold on, because I need to take a break, but we will come back and talk more about this on the other side. We want to remind our listeners that you can hear this and every edition of the Daily Drum Insight segment via podcast on WHUR.com. The original Quiet Storm with Raheem Devon is coming up next on WHUR-FM. This conversation continues on Sirius XM channel 141 in just a few seconds. Welcome back to the Daily Drum on Sirius XM channel 141. I'm Harold Fisher. We continue our conversation about the Trump administration's crackdown on immigration in Minneapolis. My guests are Cynthia Wilson, president of the Minneapolis chapter of the NAACP, and Keith Alexander, editor-at-large for Bloomberg Law News. I wanted to go back to the question that I asked earlier, President Wilson, because as you were talking, one of the things that was happening here in the DMV, and I would imagine in other parts of the country late last year, was during the No King's Day protest. There was a lot of conversation on social media about, Black people who, while they were concerned about the issue, were again stepping back, standing back. We're not going to walk. We're not going to protest. We're not going to raise their voices. Some of them saying, even to some of their white colleagues, it's time for you all to step up and address these things, because Black people have been addressing these things for decades. Do you get that feeling in Minneapolis, number one? And I think number two, what impact do you believe the immigration crackdown has had on the Black community?
Yes, I agree that, the Black community is saying, yep, we want you to kind of get a sense of what we've been talking about, and for you to address these issues and see how you address them and see the response that you get. But again, that's not to say that, our community, the Black community, was not being proactive. We were, but we were doing it in ways that we felt comfortable, and in a way that we're, quote unquote, staying out of the way. But in doing that, like I said, I think that we showed our support, but we did want to see how the white community would respond and what their actions were going to be, and then see what the response they were going to get. If it was going to be same, was it going to be different? Was it going to be spontaneous? I mean, somebody, I think I just saw something that someone sent to me. They said another brother was killed by ICE, I think might have been in Chicago. And they said that the killing was, it was lawful, but the killing of Peretti and Good was unlawful. And so kind of the same situation, pulled out of his car, had questions. They said he was scuffling, but they said that was lawful. They didn't find any fault. But now there's, these two deaths that they're saying that unlawful, needs to be taken to court, blah, blah, blah. So, it's interesting. It's really, unfortunate that we have to say black, white, but the truth of the matter is it's real. And so if we act like it's not, then we're kidding ourselves. And so I dare not sit here and act like, if this was a Black man and a Black woman that were killed, they'd probably still be saying it was justifiable.
Keith, when you were there after the killing of Alex Peretti, how would you characterize the protests? I mean, obviously you were not in Minneapolis when Renee Good or Alex Peretti were killed. So I don't think you really have, you don't have so much a comparison between before that happened and afterwards, but just how would you characterize, the protests when you were there?
When I was there, again, I was struck by both Peretti and Good's memorials where they were killed, were like about 10 minutes away from each other. And we're still seeing people, what I noticed, people were still walking in droves, walking up and down the streets, carrying flowers, carrying signs, a lot of signs that say "ICE out," "ICE get the F out," a whole lot of signs like that. That was very common to see a lot of those people carrying those signs, and seeing people. Well, again, I'm struck walking slowly in sub-zero degree weather, walking slowly, arm in arm, and then just showing up wherever they believe the agents are going to be. And I noticed that, if word would get out that there are agents riding around this neighborhood, then you would see protesters showing up in that neighborhood carrying those signs, and having their cameras out and being very clear that the first thing that you, as an agent, you're going to see is my camera pointing at you. No matter what you do, we're recording this. That's what I was seeing. Just seeing how very strategic these protests are in trying to be a voice and eyes for the interaction between the agents and these immigrants, and also to document evidence should that evidence be needed if these cases were to go to court. That's what I was most struck by. Mm-hmm. And also real quick, and I know you didn't ask about this, I've been telling people that I've been covering international cases going all the way back to 1991, right out of college. I would have to have my passport with me with my press pass, and hold my press pass and my passport. This was the first time that I ever had to carry my passport with my press badge within the U.S. while covering cases, and that really struck me. That I was advised that when I'm out there talking to people, make sure you have your passport with you. And I see President Wilson was nodding her head because I was my little brown self out there. They don't know what we were going to say. So I have my passport right here in front of me while I'm taking notes, and just in case. And that really struck me the first time in 30 plus years as a journalist. Never need my passport within the U.S.
I'm sure once you started talking, your Pittsburgh/DC accent would have absolved you of anything. But that does bring me to another point. So, President Wilson, what is the African American community's relationship with the Africans in America, the Somalis in Minnesota, like?
Well, there's an ongoing relationship gap that we're trying to work on building. But just like anything else, we were created just to be divided. So they provide the resources for every other culture except for the Black American culture. So it allows these different cultures to feel better than. Okay, and so there's that separation, but we have been working to bridge those gaps, because we are better together, and so we've had, I think, 2 African descent and African American kind of summits, if you will, to bring about understanding both the cultures and how we can work together. So that's been going on, and it's the 2 summits that we've had have been very successful. We're still, like I said, there's things that we're working on, because more than anything, I just think it's understanding the culture. It's unfortunate that no matter where you're from, and these are some factual things that I'm about to tell you, that the African descent, Somali, Liberia, they've told their children to stay away from African American black children in school, not to hang out with them, not because they're bad news, they're trouble, they're this. These are perceptions that they've been given and they have embraced, and which is the reason why there's a that divide. But through education, communication, understanding, that's where we're bridging those gaps. But just like any other culture that comes over, they pretty much say the same thing.
So, the reason I ask is because I'm wondering, since President Trump had said those horrible things about the Somali community, particularly in the wake of the so-called fraud report,
Fraud investigation.
Fraud investigation. Thank you, Keith. Have things changed between the Black community and the Somali community as a result of the comments and the investigation?
Like I said, we're building the gap because ain't gonna change overnight. You got.
Well, guess what I'm asking. Well, this is why I asked that, because in the wake of that, who has reached out to whom? Has Somali leadership reached out to the NAACP, or was it NAACP saying to the Somali community, saying, "You all hear that"? I guess that's what I'm getting at.
Right. So what we have, when I say we have these summits, we have organizations that are part of it's called Unity and Community Mediation Team. It's a group of organizations that combine their knowledge, resources to engage all of the folks of color community. And so we speak to the heads of the Somali community, we speak to the heads of the Latino community, the heads of the Asian community, and then we come together and we talk about ways that we can support each other and engage our community with information and education that they need to be successful. Now, that being said, it's up to each of those heads to go back to their community and share that information and make sure everybody's on board. But again, this kind of stuff takes time, and it don't matter what Trump said. The votes, you got to realize where he was heavy with the votes. He was heavy with the votes with the Somalians, heavy with the votes with the Latinos. The same folks he's sending home, these are the folks that voted him in.
And I was surprised by that. I talked to a cab driver from East Africa, Eritrea, who told me, he said that he and his people have been voted Republican for decades when they got into this country. And he said that he was surprised. He said Trump never said he was going to do this. He voted for Trump all three times. He said he and his people from his church, his community, they all voted for Trump. And they are now surprised because Trump never said that he was going to do anything like this. But he said that, at least in East Africa, that they supported the Republican regime because the Democrats, according to him, have not been supportive of East Africa as the Republicans have. So as a result, when they came to the U.S., they voted Republican. So I was sort of surprised to hear about that.
Yeah, and arguably, and this is a whole nother show, that Donald Trump is not anything like any traditional Republican that this country has seen in modern times. And so that, like I said, that's a whole nother conversation, as they say. Keith, I wanted to ask you about the arrest of Don Lemon in Georgia Fort, because you were there after these incidents happened. Were you ever concerned? No, you're not necessarily what one would consider to be a rabble rouser. Your reporting is with words.
Yes, sir.
You're not a broadcaster.
Right.
I don't know. He has smirking, so I don't know.
Other than on this program. But in the wake of the arrest of Don Lemon in Georgia Fort, did that give you pause?
That's a good question, Harold. It reminded me of Ferguson, right? It reminded me of places where journalists go to get the story, but you also have to adhere to what the laws are, whatever the rules are. Because as I've told journalists numerous times, my job is to tell the story. I can't tell the story if I become the story and I get arrested. If I'm arrested, who's going to tell the story? So my number one thing is to make sure I don't get arrested, so I can tell the story and tell people what's going on, and not make the story, or not have the story become me. And so if police say you can't go here, guess what? I'm not going to go there. I'm just very cognizant of trying to stay within the guidelines, because I do have a job to do. And if I am locked up, that job is not going to get done. So that's my number one priority.
Mm-hmm. What concerns have you had, President Wilson, in the wake of the arrest of Don Lemon in Georgia Fort?
Well, I'm kind of, from the same perspective of Keith. I mean, you have to be wise. I mean, just because of who we are and what we do, we have to be wise. And, I just think we have to look at the end game. What is the end game? Mm-hmm. Could I have gotten this information differently? Mm-hmm. Could I have done something differently? What was the purpose of going into the church? Right? Now, there's going to be some folks that don't agree with me on that, but I'm a worshiper. And if I'm at my church and some folks come in there talking about, you can't pray, whatever, nowadays they got iron folks in the church. Because I don't know what's next. I don't know if you got a bomb. I don't know if you got something in your coat. I don't know. I just know that you're coming in and you're yelling and you're disrupting. You would be disrupting my place of worship. Mm-hmm. So all of those things come into play for me.
But as a journalist, a church, not to cut you off, President, but a church is public space. A journalist can go into a church, but it's how you go in and who you go in there with. Is that you can't go in.
That's what I'm saying.
Yes, right.
That's what I'm saying. So in terms, because I was at the protest for Georgia. I know Georgia. Mm-hmm. Georgia has been very instrumental in bringing the news to the Black community and for the NAACP. So I was there for the protest for the press release on getting her released, which I knew they were. I knew they were just going to come up with these trumped up charges and then they were going to release her. I mean, the First Amendment says so. So, I mean, there's some things that I wasn't really, I wasn't shocked about. I figured that this, what's the lady's name? Who charged them?
Pam Bondi?
Pam Bondi.
You mean the Attorney General.
When she said that she was going to get everyone who went in that church, I figured that's what she was going to do. She was going to go ahead, even if she can't make it stick, I'm going to arrest these individuals. And I'm going to make that a point. So that being said, when you're talking about journalists, no, they have the right to go and do these things. But to Keith's point, you still got to, weigh the situation and say, what's going to be the end game? Am I going to be the one that's being locked up and the news is going to now be about me? Mm-hmm. Or do I wait and say, nope, y'all go ahead and go in. I'm going to wait out here and I'll get people as they come out. So there's a lot that I think that goes into it, especially now. There's so much unpredictability that's out there. And when you're talking about ICE, and there's so much backlash that I think that could have came from this or could probably continue to come from this, because you can get some folks that say, okay, well, you came in our church, now we're coming in yours, and let's just see how y'all like it.
Yeah.
And they may not be on the same strength that we were doing. We were coming, quote unquote, in peace. We weren't, didn't have no guns or anything to that nature. We was just yelling and saying what we, they said what they said. But everybody might not be on that same level. Just because you punch me in the face, that might mean I'm coming to stab you in the neck.
Yeah,
I ain't doing it the same way.
One of the things that I think back on the January 6th on Capitol Hill, and all that took place, the mob, And, several of us, we were running behind the mob as they were going into the Capitol. And I remember my editor texted and said, "Do not follow them into the Capitol." And we're like, why not? But that's what the story is. And it didn't dawn on me. That's breaking and entering. They are breaking into the Capitol, and you're following right behind them. You will be charged just like they are. And I'm thinking, oh, no, I got to get the news. But yes, you need someone to say, no, stand outside and wait until they come out and get that story. You don't have to be, you can't follow everyone into every situation. You just can't do it.
Well, and just as an aside, and not necessarily to dwell on this, but one of the things I do remember on January 6th, even when I was watching it as a native Washingtonian, is that prior to them breaching, the Capitol, the thing that I was saying to my colleagues, my news director was, yeah, they're not going to go into the Capitol because I know that if you do that, you will get shot, because that was the expectation. And when it did not happen until well into the riot at the Capitol, and that one young lady was shot, and it just made me. It raised a whole lot of questions, but again, that's another conversation. I did want to the point about reporting, Keith. You are with Bloomberg Law News now, but the most of your career was spent at the Washington Post. You won a Pulitzer, for that. But as you know, last week, more than 300 of your former colleagues were laid off. And I guess the question I have is, what impact do you believe those layoffs will have in covering not only local news in the District of Columbia, but these kind of issues nationwide? More than 300 reporters and those who support them. That's a lot of people.
Actually, it's more than 400. That 300 number was the Guild is saying it's more than 400 people. My coworker, my colleagues and friends. A dark day for the Washington Post, a dark day for journalism. Is right that readers who depended on this newspaper for decades to be the eyes and the ears and the voice, not just for Washington, D.C., but for the DMV and for the nation and for the world. To cut all these jobs in foreign, have most jobs in foreign, to eliminate the sports section entirely, to get rid of all photographers, to now only rely on freelance photographers, to cut the metro section that covered DC, Maryland, Virginia, to down from 80 to 12 journalists.
Wow.
I can't imagine what this is going to mean in terms of holding politicians, holding police, holding judges, holding attorneys accountable, holding educators and school divisions accountable. I can't imagine. And then those who are left, who are remaining, who are now going to have to pick up those other jobs and have to decide, I can't do all 5 of these stories. I got to now pick which one to do. It's a very sad time. The Washington Post was everywhere. The Washington Post was everywhere, holding the powerful accountable and being a voice for the voiceless, doing stories on communities that were overlooked and ignored constantly. Mm-hmm. And now there's no reporter left to do that. So yeah, this is a sad time. And people have said, well, the Washington Post has overcome darkness before. The whole Janet Cook scandal back, when Janet Cook, wrote a story and kind of give back the Pulitzer Prize. What's different now is that back then there was only the New York Times, the Washington Post, and the Wall Street Journal and TV networks. Now there are media outlets all over this country. There are people have their own media outlets that they're doing. So the Washington Post is losing so much readership that if once the Washington Post regains its foundation, people have gone on to New York Times, they've gone on to other news outlets. They were not going to miss the Washington Post. And so I'm worried about the future of this publication, because it's going to be a while before the publication is back on its feet. And during that time, readers will have gone to other media outlets to get their news, and they won't come back to the Washington Post.
Yeah, I have one final question for President Wilson, because I'm really almost out of time. But right now, Minneapolis is no longer dominating that national front page of news. We've got the Savannah Guthrie issue in Arizona, the kidnapping of her mother. We've got Epstein, and even the weather has dominated the news. With that said, when the spotlight fades, what happens to the communities, in your opinion, that are still living inside this story? Does there have to be another tragedy for this to continue to be important to the masses?
God forbid another tragedy. So we're working every day to make sure that we're still, getting the word out about, if you protest responsibly. If you need help, we have, a number that they can call, email that they can reach out to. We're still doing the same thing. So we're not skipping a beat just because the media is not on us. And I think all of this stuff with the media anyway was kind of strategic from the government. And that's a whole, in your words, that's a whole
what stuff with the media?
A whole other story to talk about.
What stuff with the media? I'm sorry, what stuff with the media?
I'm talking about all of the different news that's happening. There's always going to be the weather, but there's a strong focus on the weather, and then there's a strong focus on, the kidnapping of the mother. And I don't want to debate it, but I'm just saying that it's just Epstein. The time in which things happen to me seems kind of strategic for everything that Trump is doing, right? So you take your eyes off of what he's doing, because he was getting a whole lot of bad press and bad rap with the killing of Peretti and Good. And, that second killing, because first one, they was like, well, it was her fault. She was a this and she was a that. But then the second one was like, oh, no, this man clearly wasn't doing a thing and he was killed. And so I think because of all the negativity that was coming from that, it was like, okay. And you ain't heard it from me. I'm just saying what I'm saying. But it interests me a little, the timing of all of this. Not the weather, but the Epstein files, the kidnapping of the mother,
the Obama meme that he put out.
The meme, come on, something. There's all of this stuff is taking our sights off of what Trump is up here doing, and we better focus on the real stuff. That's why I said the killing and the murdering that happened, and unfortunately, it's probably going to happen somewhere else. It's my hope and my prayer that people use Minneapolis, the state of Minnesota, as a template to see how we navigated through this, how we stood up and said, we're not going to allow ICE to come in and dictate to us what we can and can't do. And they're not just going to kill people and grab people out of cars. So we're going to get whistles. They passed out whistles people were doing things that they felt necessary to get the word out. Honk your horn if you see them. Let people know. So I don't think any of those things are going to stop. We're going to continue to do those things. We're going to continue whatever efforts and resources and support that we were doing. We're going to continue those things, because just because the camera ain't shining, baby, we still got to live.
Yeah.
And folks was coming with the cameras, and folks came and did. Don't get me wrong. A lot of people came here and did some little photo ops, and that's in your words, that's a whole other story.
I'm going to have to have that. I'm going to have that be the last word, because I am out of time. But I did want to thank you both, Cynthia Wilson, president of the Minneapolis chapter of the NAACP, and Keith Alexander with Bloomberg Law News. Thank you both so much. That is the Daily Drum for this Monday, February 9th. I'm Harold Fisher.